Good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone, members, officers and members of the public to this meeting of the Planning Control Committee. Before the meeting starts, I'd like to invite the committee clerk, Caroline Jenkins, to explain how proceedings will work.
Rules of debate. If a member wishes to speak, they should use the speak button located on the microphone unit. The microphone will light up green and the chair will be alerted to your request to speak. When the chair invites you to speak, your microphone will be made live and will turn red, at which point you can speak. When the public participants are invited to speak, their microphones will be made live by the committee officer. When requested to vote, voting will be via the yes, no, abstain buttons on your microphone unit. Details of how members voted will be shown on the screens around the room and the result will be visible on the YouTube stream. In the event of a tied vote, the chair will have the casting vote. Are there any questions before we start the meeting?
Thank you, Caroline. Apologies for absence. I've received apologies from councillors Terry Tyler, Sean Nolan, Ian Moody and Phil Weeder. Having given due notice, Councillor Dave Winstanley will be substituting for Councillor Nolan and Councillor Michael Muir will be substituting for Councillor Ian Moody. Are there any further apologies?
Not a further apology, but I've got a message out to Michael, just to Councillor Muir, just to see where he is.
Thank you. Minutes of 23rd of January 2024. I propose we take as read and approve the minutes of the meeting held on 23rd January 2024 as a true recording of proceedings. Can I have a seconder, please?
Yeah, happy to second that.
Thank you, Councillor Tyson. Any comments on the minutes? Can we go to a vote on the minutes, please, Caroline?
Chair, that vote is carried.
Thank you. Notification of the business there is none. Chair's announcements. Recording. In accordance with the council policy, this meeting is being recorded. Recording will be available both on the council's YouTube channel as well as on the council's ModGov site alongside documents for this meeting. Declarations of interest. Members are reminded to make declarations of interest before an item. The detailed reminder of this and speaking rights is set out under Chair's announcements on the agenda. To clarify matters for registered speakers, the Council has recently updated its speaking procedure for registered speakers at these meetings and should provide more time for members of the public to have their say on planning applications. I want to confirm this in detail. Members of the public in groups of supporters or objectors have up to 3 minutes per person, whereas only one public supporter or objector, then that member of public will have up to 5 minutes. There are separate groups for people registered as member advocate objectors, member advocate supporters, and for the applicant, their agent or representative. This is up to 5 minutes per group. All speakers will receive a warning when you have 1 minute remaining. On the conclusion of your time, members will be invited to ask points of clarification. That means that the councillors on the front row can actually ask you questions about what you've said. At the end of the allocated time, you'll be advised that the time allowed has ended and you must cease speaking. Section 4.8.23a. The purpose of clarification. In order to vote on an agenda item at this meeting, a member must be present for the entirety of the debate and consideration for that item. If a member leaves the room at any point of the item, they will not be able to vote. Removal of an item. Item 621/00541/OP has been deferred until a future meeting due to unresolved outstanding matters in relation to Section 106 obligations. Public participation. Can I confirm the following Registered speakers are in attendance. Mr. Sandy Gordon, Councillor Gerald Morris, Mr. Shane Ahern, Councillor Louise Peace, Councillor Ray Blake, Mr. James Porter. We'll start with the agenda. So item 6, which is 21/00541/OP, land between 134 and 148 High Street, Kimpton. This item has been deferred until a future meeting due to unresolved outstanding matters in relation to Section 106 obligations. So we'll go immediately on to item 7, which is 23/00523/OP, land east of Ashwell Poultry Farm, High Street, Barkway. Alex Howard to present, please.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everyone. Just a few updates for you. I am aware of an email and an attachment that was circulated to some members on Monday, the 4th of March, and the attachment was a presentation with commentary considering various elements of the proposal. As not all members received this, I have uploaded it to the public access as a supplementary document so that everybody can see it. At this point, I'd like to take the opportunity to refer members to paragraphs 4.3.9 and 4.3.12 of the report, where it is covered that on the 12th of February, the applicant proposed changes to the scheme from general market housing to self-build and the provision of one affordable home on site instead of off-site provision, and this has been fully considered in the report. And finally, the agent has made me aware that a document submitted to the council on the 21st of December, which was a follow-up summary note from their old ODA consultant, was not appearing on the council's website, and this has now been rectified as of today. So can we go to the slides, please? Thank you very much. So this identifies the location of the site, which is an open field on the west side of the High Street in Barkway. The site is located on the southern edge of the village and is bounded by the highway to the east, residential properties to the north, open fields to the south, and Ashmill Poultry Farm to the west. The site is currently accessed via a field gate on Ash Mill, measures approximately 0.91 hectares and is relatively flat. The site is located outside the defined settlement boundary for Barkway and is therefore designated within the rural area beyond the Greenbelt. The site is also partly within the Barkway Conservation Area where it fronts the High Street and is within close proximity to 2 Grade 2 listed buildings. Next slide, please. So this is a photo of the eastern boundary of the site fronting the High Street, where there is an existing line of fairly dense landscaping. Midway down this frontage is approximately where the site access is proposed. Next slide, please. And this is just another view of that eastern boundary from slightly further north on the High Street. Next slide, please. This photo is looking towards the site from further south on the High Street. Next slide, please. And this is a view from within the site looking north towards the residential properties on Ash Mill. You will note the dense tree line on the western boundary, which separates the site from the adjacent Ash Mill Poultry Farm. Next slide, please. And this is just another photo of that dense tree line on the western boundary. Next slide, please. This is a view from within the site looking south towards the remaining open fields. Next slide, please. And this is another photo from within the site looking north, showing the relationship with the immediate neighbours. That fencing and hedging in the foreground on the right is the boundary with the Grade 2 listed building Clockhouse Cottage. Next slide, please. This is a view from within the site looking east towards the High Street. Obviously, the residential property is on the opposite side of the highway. Next slide, please. And this is just another photo, again, looking east towards the highway. Next slide, please. This is a screenshot from Google Maps showing the site in context with its immediate neighbours and part of the wider settlement. Next slide, please. And so this is just the location plan for the site, showing it in context in plan form. Next slide, please. This is the existing site plan, identifying the site boundary and the existing landscaping. Next slide, please. And this is the proposed site plan, which identifies how the scheme could be delivered on this site. Whilst indicative at this stage, the scheme would comprise 6 dwellings, a new access off the high street, an internal access road, and an area of open space. Next slide, please. This is an illustrative master plan for the site, identifying those various elements of the scheme that could be delivered. Please note that layout, appearance, landscaping, and scale are all reserved matters at this stage and are therefore not up for consideration. Next slide, please. These are just some illustrative elevations of the proposed dwellings. Next slide, please. And this is the proposed access plan onto the high street, showing acceptable visibility displays in both directions and a swept path analysis for a large vehicle. Next slide, please. And this is the proposed access plan for the internal access road, again, showing a swept path analysis for a large vehicle. Next slide, please. This is the arboricultural impact assessment plan, showing the location and category of existing trees, mostly on the borders of the site. Next slide, please. And this is the proposed tree protection plan, showing those trees that are to be retained, as well as those that would need to be removed to make way for the proposed development. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Alex. Do we have any questions from the members for the planning officer? No. Can I then please go to objector, Mr. Sandy Gordon? You have got 5 minutes starting when you're ready.
Okay, thank you very much. My name's Sandy Gordon. This is my wife, Laura. We live in Clockhouse Cottage, the one with the rickety fence that you saw there. We've been there for almost 23 years. Most of what I was going to say, we've put in our objection letter, so I'll probably just rattle through this in a couple of minutes, if that's okay. The first point is the heritage point. It's the old toll house for the village. Unfortunately, we don't collect money anymore. But it has got quite a lot of historical interest, and we feel quite strongly about it. And it would be a shame if that was gone by having new houses before us, even though they're going to be set back a little bit. You'll still see them from the road. They're still there. You've just lost a little bit of history there, in my opinion. The other point I'd like to raise is about the loss of privacy. Our house is along the road. If you look at the maps and the plans, you'll see every room is basically next to the road, so anyone walking past can look in every window. So we accept that. We bought it that way. We love the house, and we've got the privacy at the back. But if this was to go ahead, you'll see the gable end of the one nearest us will overlook our whole garden. And when in winter, when I believe it's called the Norway maple, when the leaves have come off, the back windows of that first house will be looking straight into the back of our house as well. Because of the field is about 1 meter higher than our house. So it's not just behind us, it's above and behind us. I hope that makes sense. A bit sort of imposing. The other thing with regards to that gable end of that house would be the loss of light to our pond. It wasn't shown on your maps there. And in most of the reports, it says there are no ponds within 250 meters, I believe. But we have a 30 square meter pond in that southwest corner, about 1 meter from the fence. So if that house was to be built, it would be 2 meters from that house. And between midday and early evening, that 2-story house is going to block out every bit of sunlight from that pond, which is not going to be good for the fish and the wildlife that use it. And just on the subject of the wildlife, not meaning to be critical of any of the reports that have been done. I know that people have been and visited the field and done all their bits and pieces, but there is a lot more wildlife than they have actually witnessed. And we know that because we've got a wildlife camera set up in the garden. We had a badger come in and dig up a bee's nest in the ground last year, which we found quite fascinating, even though it was a mess. So we put the camera up to see what comes in, and we found out who's been eating all the apples off the tree, and it's the deer, foxes, badgers, occasional hedgehog, but not very often. But we also get a lot of frogs and toads and newts, because we've actually got another pond as well. And any day now, they're all going to be coming for their spring mating thing and deafening us with their croaking. When that's finished, they disappear somewhere, and it's not across the road. So it must be back into the field or into our neighbours' gardens. Like I said, I'm not criticising any of the reports that have been done, but we know they're there. We've witnessed that ourselves. And then the other little points are, you've seen all these smells, odour reports and everything like that. We live there. We're a bit further away than these proposed houses would be. And again, not criticising the poultry farm because it's been there a lot longer than we have. There are times when that's pretty ripe. I wouldn't want to live any closer to it than we do at the moment. I think that's everything. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any points of clarification for Mr. Gordon from members? Councillor Tyson?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that. Can we just for the sake of clarity, because you didn't mention it, but your home is a Grade 2 listed building, is that correct? Thank you.
Please, could I ask about the smell from the facility, because it does keep coming back in our paperwork. It states repeatedly that there are 7 times a year, approximately, when the smell is at its strongest. Is it something that you would say is more of a constant, or something that happens on these occasional times? Thank you.
That please, Mr. Gordon.
Time they have a clear out, they have a cycle of whatever they do, growing and whatever, and then once they empty out, they clear it out, and that's when you get the smell. And it's particularly bad if it's damp. So if you've got a couple of wet days, just because of the atmospherics, the smell stays down, whereas in the summer on a nice hot day you might only get 1 day of smell of it. But it's every cycle, so there must be 7 cycles a year.
Thank you. Any other questions, clarification? Thank you very much. Can we go on to Member Advocate Objector, Councillor Gerald Morris?
Thank you, Chair. I'm the District Councillor for Ermine Ward, which includes the village of Barkway and this application site. And speaking in support of the officer's recommendation to refuse this application. The site was originally put forward as a possibility for housing development and for inclusion in the local plan. The site was rejected as unsuitable and not included within the local plan. The site is categorised as rural land beyond Greenbelt outside the village boundary. Biodiversity net gain. Whilst there are calculations submitted for biodiversity net gain, prior to these calculations being prepared, the site was cleared of the planting that had naturally occurred over many years, leaving in its place only a superficial cover on which the biodiversity net gain was calculated. A proposal for 6 houses is not material in addressing the North Hertfordshire housing need. The Conservation Officer has also objected to this application. Whilst it may not be a consideration in terms of planning, it's regrettable that the landowner cynically decided just prior to this application to demolish a 1939 World War II pillbox located on the site. The site is subject to a previous application that was refused and on appeal dismissed. Also, other housing applications along the adjacent axis of Ash Mill have also been refused for similar reasons, and these are included in the officer's report. The committee will be aware that it is right next to a poultry farm. Environmentally, to locate houses next to this poultry farm is clearly unacceptable for the people that would then live there, and for the resultant negative consequences for this long-standing local business, which would then also affect the employment of the people that supply the business and the people that are now employed in the business. I do hope that, as recommended by the case officer, the committee will refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Morris. Do we have any points of clarification of Councillor Morris? No. And we then go on to the applicant, Mr. Ahern. When you're ready, please.
Is that working? Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of this application. My name is Shane Ahern. I'm a chartered architect and director of Editland Family Business. The site is located on unused scrubland, not agricultural land nor greenbelt, that abuts the village boundary. It is firmly positioned between built-up development enclosed on 3 sides and adjacent to the only amenities in the village. Furthermore, Barkway is one of 5 villages earmarked for growth in the new local plan. We believe the scheme presented for you is an excellent one, providing 6 family homes, 5 of which will be self-built plots, plus the delivery of 1 affordable home, all for local people. 80% of the site is left open green space, including a public outdoor play area and 52% biodiversity net gain. Unfortunately, we were not engaged in the site during the call for site process. However, the SLA had identified the site suitable for 6 homes. There is a statutory obligation to provide self-build plots, giving local people the opportunity to design and build their dream homes. NHDC currently has a significant shortfall of 65% against the requirement and have no known plots so far consented in Barkway. It can only be argued that delivery of an affordable home, which we'd like to make available for key workers only, is seen as a massive benefit for the scheme and is considerably above policy requirements. There are 2 issues raised: odour and heritage. If the case officer is a good example of clear, concise communication, the environment officer an example of the flaws in planning. This scheme has been wholly designed around odour. We've employed one of the country's leading odour experts, Dr. Claire Holman, who is a PhD in air pollution and was, in fact, chair of the Institute of Air Quality Management. In other words, she wrote the guidance this is assessed against to inform us where the houses should be positioned. To be crystal clear, we're not talking about a permanent odour issue. This issue is 7 cycles per year, where at the end of the growing cycle, the poultry farm is cleared and cleaned when odour is at its peak. The hotter the external temperature, the heightened the smell. Our survey was carried out in early July, nearly 25 degrees, the worst case scenario. And even at this, Dr. Holman considered the odour to be acceptable. Inaccuracies such as references in the previous inspector's decision are incredibly ill-informed and misleading. That application was a mere 3 metres from the poultry farm. We are 60 to 70 metres, and more importantly, our own report supports that section of the site is unviable on odour grounds. How is that then held against us? The EO at the council refused to have a single phone call where we could have explained the report and helped them come to an informed decision, which is disheartening at best. Why bother employing the best consultants and try and put forward a high quality scheme when you can't even have a professional conversation? No wonder the planning system is collapsing. Dr. Holman has quoted there'll be no significant odour impact in these houses. The EO officer isn't even referencing the latest guidance and simply doesn't understand the report. In practical terms, why would we risk thousands of pounds and hundreds of hours of work if we didn't believe this was a fantastic site or worse and sellable at the end? Clearly, Barkway must be unlivable with such horrendous odour conditions. The evidence clearly states otherwise. Just look at the sold data. Barkway is in fact one of the highest value villages in the district, if not the country. Evidence supported by property only 200 metres from the site, current in the market for £1.7 million. This doesn't make sense. With regard to the heritage objection, which is only moderate harm, we simply strongly disagree with the position. The officer had not provided any supporting evidence, and most of his comments didn't even relate to heritage concerns. Planning applications are becoming increasingly complex and expensive to such an extent that family-run SME business like ourselves will no longer be able to offer the award-winning, high-quality schemes that we've been proud to deliver today. The only consents will come from large PLCs who have millions to risk, create bog-standard box housing, which are often poorly constructed. Is this what you want for constituents? It's probably what we delivered on the allocated site to the north of Barkway. NHDC can only demonstrate a land supply of 3.5 years and must find more sites to meet need. We have evidence this site is suitable,
1 minute
sustainable location. All parties have committed delivering 300,000 homes a year to help ease the current housing crisis, where we need 4.2 million homes. We have 270,000 homeless people, twice the population of North Arts itself, and most shockingly, 130,000 children in temporary accommodation. This figure is nothing short of disgraceful in a wealthy country that is only built on 5.9% of its land. Small, deliverable sites like this make an invaluable positive contribution to ease this. We trust you find this a strong application where the benefits clearly outweigh the harm. In fact, we're not fully clear who this development actually harms in the first place, probably reflecting the minimum amount of objections. It offers much needed self-building housing for locals and an affordable home for a key worker, while providing public accessible open space, a play area, and massive B&G enhancements. We hope you can recommend this application for approval.
Thank you, Mr. Hearn. Exactly 5 minutes. Point of clarification of Mr. Hearn, please. Councillor Levitt.
Thank you. Good evening. Sorry to have me back to work here. You on the application saw on the screen there, you've done quite detailed plans for site layout and everything. Much further on than I would normally expect from an outline application. Why didn't you go straight for a full application? Sorry. As saying, there was quite a lot of detail on the slides about the layout and everything on there, and elevations and everything. I was just wondering why not go straight for a full application and go for an outline.
Sorry, it's just a decision made with our consultant team at the time. Really, we just wanted to make sure the principle was agreed before going in with the final detailed application. Now that we've in fact offered it for self-build houses, what this does is it gives people an opportunity to design their own houses. So rather than the typical layout you'll get in a PLC development, people get to design their own home. And of course, that would go back to your planning team to make sure they're happy. Things like overlooking, overshadowing, etc. would all be made sure that doesn't happen at that point of detailed design.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bloxham.
Thank you. Yeah, there was quite a bit in your 5 minutes that you took there. There was quite a bit of information about having a go at the council and what we expect and is this
Councillor
right?
Bloxham, could you reword that, please?
I'm going to have, yeah, well, it's come to the question, really. What I think was lost in what you said in that 5 minutes was actually the benefits of why it should be there. I think you did mention it, but it might be worthwhile just summarising what the benefits are, but you can leave out the bit about is that what we really want from the council? Is this planning system in disarray?
None of that was directed at this council. It's based at the planning experiences that we have over the last 12 years and particularly the last few years. But the benefits of this scheme, we believe, is the primary benefit is the delivery of self-build homes. There's a statutory obligation to deliver self-build homes. So there isn't a single unit offered in Barkway to date. We know that there's 89 people registered in specifically for Barkway, so there is a demand. What this does is it gives people the opportunity to build their home in areas where they wouldn't normally be able to. We will be delivering an affordable home, and what we'd like to do is offer that just to key workers. So each council has their own definition of key workers, but obviously nurses, firemen, policemen, etc., would be capable of qualifying for this, and that would be something we'd agree in Section 106 with Alex and his team. We've also offered an external play area, and a large amount of space off the site would be given back to public space and for biodiversity net gain. So we do like to believe this is a very, very strong suite of benefits for the site.
Thank you. That was much clearer. So thank you for the question. Councillor Peace.
Yeah, can I just clarify then that you're intending 5 self-build homes and then the sixth home would not be self-build, but it would be reserved for key workers.
To a key worker.
Thank you. Councillor Winstanley?
Yeah, thanks. Can I just check, when you carried out the assessment of the odour in the July, was that, you may well have said this, so apologies if I missed it, was that during one of the 7 cycles where they clear out the sheds?
Yes, we've liaised closely with the farmer who is the absolute utmost professional, always giving us the details. He in fact upgraded the emissions a number of years ago, and since he's upgraded the excuse me, I'm not using the technical terms, but the extraction units, there's been no objections. So we specifically asked him what date it was that the worst case, and we've done it over 3 days, and they're also done over one of the hottest periods of the year, which I think is in the report, it shows the range. I think one of the days was 25 degrees.
Yeah, sorry to keep going about the odour thing, but presumably there isn't equipment that can measure odour. Surely it's just subjective. So what one person thinks is smelly and what another person doesn't.
It's a fascinating thing, because I hadn't a clue about odour until this project, and it's incredible what you learn. But believe it or not, so what you do, we've done an initial modelling assessment, which takes a worst case scenario, and I don't know if you've seen the report, but that's where it's shown the orange mapping of where the odour is at its worst. That dictated where we placed the properties. So we've specifically placed these properties away from that. After doing that, then we did an on-site survey, which was over the 3 days. So what's really interesting is someone actually has to qualify for this testing. So they actually have to have, believe it or not, a nose that can test certain. I know it sounds crazy, but they actually have tests where they have to qualify that they can smell odours. It's a very detailed report. As far as I'm aware, there actually isn't specific policy against it. So you're right, it is subjective. I mean, what we might add is, in our opinion, if it was so bad, I mean, we have reached out to all the neighbours in Ashmill Lane. If it was so bad, I don't know if people would be there for 20 years or more. And it is a very sought after area. That wouldn't insinuate to us that it's that bad. I mean, we had family.
Can I cut you off
Sorry.
there, because you're going a bit off the topic. Councillor Levitt.
Thank you. Just coming back on that odour thing, you mentioned earlier that the filtration system on the farm was upgraded. You don't know roughly when that was, do you?
I couldn't tell you specifically. It's something I'm sure we can have confirmed. I think 3 or 4 years ago.
Thank you. Councillor Peace.
Can I just go back to the odour thing again? Sorry. We heard from the resident that the odour is actually worse in wet weather. And you mentioned that you did your odour survey on quite a hot, dry day. Have you done any studies when the weather is wet?
No.
Any more questions for Mr. Ahern? No. Can I then go back to the officer to respond to any issues raised, please?
Nothing to raise, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. And so can I have a proposer? Councillor Tyson.
I'm happy to propose that we support the recommendation to refuse this on the grounds given, particularly the fact that it's outside the settlement boundary. It's got a, do I need to go into all the reasons at this point? No. Okay. So I'll just reserve my right to speak on that. Yeah. So that's my proposal.
Thank you. Can we have a seconder, please? Councillor Bloxham.
I'll second and reserve my right.
Thank you. Shall we go to debate? Councillor Allen.
Can I just ask question to the officer? Is it a bit late about the legality of only offering a property to an affordable property in the way that's being suggested here to a key worker?
Probably best that Sean answers that one. Sorry.
There's nothing unlawful or illegal about such a proposition. It's a unilateral offer from the sounds of it because it's below the threshold necessary for affordable housing. Our affordable housing policy sets out the percentage of social rented and shared equity affordable tenures. Key worker can form part of affordable housing tenure, but I'm not aware of the specific need for affordable housing for key workers in Barkway.
Does that answer your question? Thank you. Let's continue with the debate. Councillor Levitt.
Thank you. I'm in two minds about this one, to be perfectly honest. The odour seems to be the big selling point for refusal on this one. As somebody's already mentioned, it is subjective. And I'm just looking at the environmental officer's own reports here. The planning appeal refers to the existing planning appeal. So that was in 2016. It was a 2016 application. Since then, they've had the new filtration systems installed. So really, you can't take that into account, I wouldn't have thought, because you're not comparing like with like. So using that as a reason, I think, is slightly dodgy ground, to be quite honest. I've been involved with other ones with odour assessments, and it's so subjective, and it is intermittent. To be honest, I think, as far as I can see from this, the benefit of doing these self-builds outweighs the possible issues from odours. So I'm minded not to support the refusal.
Thank you, Councillor Levitt. Councillor Allen.
I agree with Councillor Levitt. I think that as far as this goes, the opportunity to give self-builds in this area is good. I understand the odour issues are out of date as far as our responses are concerned. I'm aware we are outside of the local area, but it is still very much within visually the local area, as people have mentioned during this. And honestly, I have seen and approved significantly worse options than this. I think this is actually quite good.
Follow your sentiment, but you can't actually say that. I have a concern, and my concern is that we spend a lot of time on odour, but in fact, we've not actually debated the reasons given by the officer for refusal. And could you indulge me, members, by just looking at page 47 and to make sure that you're clear about what those the reasons for refusal are that are being given by the officer. And I would appreciate if that might come up in debate. Councillor Peace.
I'm also quite conflicted on this, given that it will provide self-build houses and an affordable property for key workers. But I am minded to agree with the officer's recommendation on the grounds that it will affect the heritage of the area, and that it's the conservation officer who has objected to this. I'm also slightly concerned by the monitoring of the odour in wet and dry conditions, and that we've got differing opinions on which is likely to be worse. So overall, my inclination at the moment is to agree with the recommendation given by the officer for the reasons given by the officer.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. Councillor Levitt?
Again, just coming back on reason 2 for refusal about the same issue, is about its setting. If you look at it on if you go use Google Maps on a much wider scale than what we saw on there, and look at it, it actually fills in a little corner. It doesn't. It's not as if it's set out on its own. It's filling in what's already developed there. I can't see how that small number of houses close to the road has an adverse impact. I think it says the harm is less than substantial.
Yeah, less than substantial might be they're not knocking down the grade 2 listed building or anything. We don't know what part of the scale it is, do we, on less than substantial? Yes, please.
With regards to MPPF, it identifies substantial harm and less than substantial harm. Now, when it comes to substantial harm, there's been court cases that identified that substantial harm would be where the heritage interest of, for example, listed building would be vitiated or destroyed. So to achieve that level of harm, you'll be demolishing the listed building. Now, less than substantial harm is everything else below that level. So it can include quite substantial effects upon heritage interest. And there's a very wide spectrum within the spectrum of less than substantial harm. And it includes most cases where there's harm to heritage assets. In this instance, our conservation officer considers that the degree of harm is moderate within that spectrum of less than substantial harm. So it's a fair amount of harm to the setting of the listed buildings and the heritage significance of those buildings that would arise from the urbanization of what is currently a rural pastoral setting to those listed buildings with a more urban setting. So that is the assessment of our conservation officer with regards to the degree of harm to those listed buildings. And also part of the conservation area is within the application site with one dwelling proposed within the conservation area as well. So it's harm to the conservation area as well. Thank you.
Do we want to see any of the plans again? If so, please say so. Could you put your microphone on, please? And then
Yeah, could we see the indicative layout again, please?
the indicative layout. This is done remotely, which is why there's this time gap. Can we see one of the plans again, please? Can you shout when we get to it?
It's the 4th plan in, so keep going. No, sorry, back. Keep going. And then keep going back. The only one that has a lot of colour on it. There you go.
Any questions stemming from the plan? If not, I will go to Councillor Bloxham. Councillor Bloxham.
Thank you. One of the reasons why I'm seconding this is exactly why you've brought that up, and I'm glad you have, Chair, of this for this particular proposal. in 5.1, point 1 and point 2 are the reasons why we should be accepting this for refusal. I think it says there are phrases in there that say it's not acceptable under our policies and under other policies. I think the odour is some almost like, I don't know, I could be very wrong, but almost like church bells. If you buy a house in that area, that's the sort of thing you put up with. You should know about this. I think the self-build or contractor builds, who cares? They're houses that are going up. It looks a great design, but I think we have clear phrases in there that are telling us that actually this is against policies and we should really be guided and minded by that.
Thank you, Councillor Bloxham. Councillor Tyson?
My thoughts entirely. I'm looking at the reasons for refusal. I can see that this is outside the settlement boundary. The conservation officer points out, as we've got it on the screen there, that these houses are sort of rearward facing off the side and set away from the high street. When anyone who knows Barkway well will know that the high street in Barkway, it's a very linear configuration, and the houses all face onto the high street. So in terms of the impact as you come into the village there, that would be the first thing you see coming into the village, and that's just not in keeping with the character of the rest of the village. The reason that only part of it's in the conservation area, I assume, is because it's not even in the village settlement boundary. So it's unlikely, therefore, to be part of the conservation area. And the case officer's report says here, and I think we need to take this quite seriously, that the proposed development would not comply with any of the criteria for suitable development in this area, and conflicts therefore with policy CGB 1 of the local plan about development in the rural area beyond the green belt. So I think we have to take that quite seriously. And then, of course, there's the impact on the heritage other than the conservation area, but the two grade 2 listed buildings, which are opposite and adjacent to the site. So that's the reason that I would say we should refuse this.
Thank you, Councillor Tyson. Councillor Allen?
Bearing in mind that discussion about the visibility of the properties, would it be possible to see the photos again from the road showing the height of the trees and the existing screened edge?
That would be one of the first three, I believe, just to give you an idea. If you want it from the road, that is.
Thank you.
I'd go back one or two more. Maybe, yeah, that's the one.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Allen?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Councillor Mason?
I'm really conflicted on this one. I think to some extent we may collectively have gone down something of a rabbit hole by concentrating just on the odour thing. Because part of me, I think I agree with Councillor Bloxham and the church bells. Part of me is thinking, well, if you're gonna buy a house there, let alone self-build it, you're probably gonna notice there's a chicken farm there. So I'm not sure in itself. I think if that were the sole reason, I think I would not be minded to reject it. However, I am very minded of what the report says about our own policies, and I'm trying to be consistent and think if I was sat here being asked to accept a proposal that appeared to be out with our policies, I think I'll be jumping up and down and saying, but our policies say. So I'm just trying to be consistent on this, and I think I'm going to have to go with that, because I think ultimately that's the most significant factor.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. Anybody else want to take part in the debate? No. Are we ready to go to the vote? Now, if you vote yes, you are voting for refusal. Yes, make sure I've got that right. If you vote yes, it's refusal. If you vote no, it's to accept it. Vote please, Caroline. So
Yeah, the vote's carried, Chair.
so that application has been refused. If those who participate in that item don't want to stay for the rest, please feel free to go.
I am taking my hat away.
Before we go on to item 8, say that Councillor Peace is leaving the front bench because she is a member advocate for this item. So we'll wait until she's been repositioned. Are you settled, Councillor Peace? Can you just check that your microphone works?
That working?
Yes. Right, thank you. Item 8, 22/02205/FP, land adjacent to Arnold's Farm, Chambers Lane, Ickleford. Tom Ray to present, please.
Chair, sorry. Can I just clarify it's okay for me to take part in this? I live about 200 yards from the development.
You'd like to answer that, please, Kerry?
Oh, thank you. Hello, everyone. I wouldn't recommend that you partake because I would say there is a personal interest with anything happening around your home might have an interference with the decision making. So normally what the practice is to not partake in the decision making or the voting. And an extra precaution would be, because it's awkward with you being on the planning committee team, I would recommend to vacate the room.
Fine.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Debenham. Tom Ray to present, please.
Thank you, Chair. I do have a couple of matters for updating the committee. The first one is in paragraph 3.10 of the report, under NHD Conservation Officer states no response. A response has actually now been received from the Council's Conservation Officer, and these comments have been placed on the website. However, they are quite brief, and if I may, I can read them out for the benefit of the committee. The site is predominantly located outside Ickleford Conservation Area, with the proposed amenity areas of the development located within, and therefore my comments are limited to the area that is located within the conservation area and its impact. The amenity, in brackets gardens, located within the conservation area are not considered to have a detrimental impact on the character given the existing grain of the conservation area. The setting of listed buildings at Arnold's Farm and the Plume of Feathers Public House will not be detrimentally affected, particularly the Plume of Feathers Public House on the opposite side of the road with no intervisibility with the proposed development. Arnold's Farm, although adjacent, abutting the proposed development site, is still considered to have enough separation not to degrade the setting. The landscaping plan does illustrate the retention of scrub to the perimeter of the site, and this is vital in maintaining this separation with the setting of the heritage asset. And that ends the comments of the conservation area chairman. The second item of updating is comments received from the lead local flood authority. The council has received 2 recent responses from the flood authority since the report was written. The first was dated 22nd of February, and it raised an objection in the absence of a flood risk assessment. This objection has been queried by officers because initially the lead local flood authority raised no objections, and secondly because the scheme has been reduced to 9 dwellings and therefore is now not classified as a major development, and there is no requirement for the council to consult the lead local flood authority under the threshold of 10 units. In response to this query, the lead local flood authority has sent a further letter dated the 4th of March, advising that the council should confirm how the site will be drained. Members will see that there is a drainage condition recommended at condition 11. The drafted condition is missing some details, and therefore it is recommended that the condition is amended and expanded to include this information, including the design of the drainage system, its timetable for implementation and management, and a maintenance plan. And thirdly, Chair, an amended site plan has been received on the 5th of March, showing where the conservation area boundary crosses the site, and I'll refer to this in my presentation. So if I could just go to the slides, Chair.
Yes, please.
So the first slide is the location plan. It shows the site on the northern edge of the village. It is boundaried by 3 public footpaths. Public footpath number 12 is to the left-hand side. Number 11 is to the northern boundary, shared with the burial ground, and footpath 5 runs in a north-south direction past Raymond Cottages, which are located on the right. The site is in private ownership and is currently overgrown with a large amount of scrub. The site is now included within the village boundary following the adoption of the local plan in November 2022. Part of the eastern boundary of the site is within the conservation area, and there are 2 listed buildings close to the site, both accessed off Chambers Lane. These buildings are Arnold's Farmhouse and the Plume of Feathers Public House. Next slide, please. This shows a view looking along Chambers Lane, looking northwest, with the site on the right-hand side behind the hedge there. Chambers Lane varies in width from about 4.5 meters to about 4.8 meters. It's an unclassified road, but it is maintained by the county council. The road junction on the left there is the junction with Boswell Drive. Next slide, please. So this photograph is also taken in Chambers Lane, looking northwest with the application site in the background. The building on the right is Arnold's Farmhouse, which is Grade 2 listed, and the building on the left is the Plume of Feathers, also Grade 2 listed. Next slide, please. This photograph is taken looking southeast along Chambers Lane, with the site on the left behind the hedgerow. Most of the hedgerow on the left-hand side would be removed to allow for the site access and the provision of plots numbers 1 and 4 and the new public footpath along Chambers Lane. Next slide, please. This photograph is taken from the Alleyfield burial grounds, looking south towards the application site. And you'll see in the background there just about housing along Chambers Lane in the distance. Next slide, please. This is taken from footpath 11, which runs along the northern boundary of the site. As you can see here, the site is unmanaged and has become quite overgrown over the last few years, with scrubland developing widely across the site. There are several gaps within the hedgerow, particularly along the northern boundary. Next slide, please. And this is also taken from footpath 11 with the site on the right-hand side. You can see here quite a large gap in the hedgerow. Next slide, please. This is looking southwards along footpath number 5 with the Raymond Cottages terrace on the left-hand side, with the application site on the right-hand side. Next slide, please. This is again taken from footpath 11, looking westwards with the application site on the left. Next slide, please. And again, another photograph looking southwards across the site towards Chambers Lane. Next slide, please. And again, similar position, looking through the gap in the hedgerow across the site towards Chambers Lane. Next slide, please. So this is the layout plan for the development proposal, showing the location of the 9 dwellings with 5 dwellings along the Chambers Lane frontage. Plot 5 is sideways on the left-hand side there. Then there is the shared surface access into the site. 4 visitor parking spaces are provided, and the majority of the site is outside of the conservation area. The boundary of the conservation area is shown by that dotted line, which doesn't really run along any defined features on the ground, whether they be fences or hedgerows. Next slide, please. This is the location plan, just showing the general location of the site within the village and the adjoining development. Next slide, please. So this slide's taken from the Ickleford Conservation Area character statement, and it shows the extent of the conservation area on the grounds. As I say, the boundary doesn't follow any defined features on the ground, and the plan also shows the 2 listed buildings closest to the site, Arnold's Farm and the Plume of Feathers, annotated there by green triangles. The red arrow there is a key view in the character statement looking towards the village green. Next slide, please. So this is a drawing showing the various street scenes of the development. The top one there is the Chambers Lane frontage. And views 2 and 3 are the views of the houses from the internal access road. The majority of the dwellings are detached, and you will see from this plan there are significant gaps between the dwellings and through the site. Next slide, please. This is the landscaping plan for the site. Apart from the Chambers Lane frontage, the existing trees around the site boundary and the hedgerows will be retained, and new planting introduced in these areas. A landscaping and ecological management plan has been recommended on the advice of the council's ecologist, which will secure more detail on these landscaping measures and how they'll be managed and monitored in the future. Next slide, please. These are beginning of the elevations to all of the plots. This is plot 9. Next slide, please. These are the plans and elevations to plots 6 and 7. You see there's a mixture of facing brick and timber cladding for these particular dwellings. Next slide, please. This is plot 5, which is at the entrance to the site, sideways on, facing the access road. Next slide, please. And this is plot 4, also at the entrance to the site. Next slide, please. And plans and elevations to plot 1, which is along the Chambers Lane frontage. Plots 1 and 4 all have the same ridge height, which is 7.3 meters between ground level and the highest part of the ridge. Next slide, please. This is plot 2, the plans and elevations. And next slide, please. And this is plot 3 plans and elevations. Thank you, Chair. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you. Any questions to the planning officer? Councillor Levitt.
Thank you. This site seems to have quite a checkered history on applications over a fairly long period, I must admit, 1966 to 2015. 8 refusals, 1 withdrawal application, 4 appeals, all appeals were dismissed, and the site was put forward for the local plan but not taken forward. What's different now?
Councillor Levitt. Yeah, as I say, the site's not in the green belt any longer. If you get the chance to look at some of those appeal decisions, the majority are concerned with the development being inappropriate development in the green belt. As I said earlier in my presentation, the site was removed from the green belt following the adoption of the plan in November 2022.
Okay now. Councillor Mason, please.
Thank you. I suppose to an extent I had in mind some question that Councillor Levitt asked. I'm slightly nervous when we have these planning applications, and even my time on here, I've seen a few where they come in with so many houses and they get rejected. So they come up with a few less, and they come up with a few less, and they come up with a few less, until hopefully they strike lucky. And I'm just slightly nervous sometimes that the underlying reason they're being rejected is because it's a bad place to build housing, and then rather than the numbers themselves. So what we're saying is it's the only reason they were rejected all those times before is because it's in the green belt, and now it's not. So I suppose that's one question, is to try and nail that down.
Can I just take one at a time?
Yes, that's correct. They were all refused on green belt grounds.
Purely on those grounds.
Yeah.
Okay.
Second question.
Yeah, the second question I suppose is a more general one. So even in my time on this committee, we seem to have seen quite a few developments in Ickleford, and I'm not sure how much. Still something of a novice. I'm not sure how much I'm allowed to ask this, but can the infrastructure of are we allowed to take into account the infrastructure of Ickleford? Because if you just keep building new builds in what was started off as quite a small village, I should imagine, I'm just slightly concerned that at some point it has to be a breaking point, and whether conditions are supposed to mitigate that, I don't know. But I'm just very nervous on that, because I don't know how many I've seen for Ickleford in the last few years.
Who would like to answer that?
Yeah, I think 2 of the allocated sites, IC3 and Burford Grange, have criteria in them which requires those developments to look at the cumulative impact of those sites plus the other sites, also including the LS1 site, which is now being completed as well. So all of those 3 sites are required to look at the cumulative impact of each other. That wouldn't apply to sites like this at Windfall site, which is not been identified as a housing site per se. Having said that, there is a transport assessment submitted with this application, which sets out the expected traffic generation from the development, and that is particularly low in this case, the number of trips to and from during the peak hours. Also, the Highway Authority has not raised any concerns about cumulative impact with other sites.
That answer your question?
Yeah.
You satisfied with that? Councillor Winstanley.
Yeah, I was just going to clarify there's currently no footpath on either side of the road, but the plan does include a footpath on the side of the development, and the carriageway is going to be widened. Did I read that right?
That's correct. There is no footpath on this part of Chambers Lane on either side, and the development will include a 2-metre wide footpath along its length, apart from the Bellmouth access.
Yeah.
And the carriageway will be widened to be consistently 4.8 metres wide. At the moment, it varies between 4.5 and 4.8 you might have seen on the photograph, there's a wall on one of the
Yeah.
properties, which narrows it slightly, but yeah, so it will be a widened carriageway for its total length.
Yeah.
Councillor Allen?
I've just spent a long time looking over at the draining, and I've just wanted to double check about heating for these properties. Do they have statements of what type of heating we are expecting them to have?
There's a sustainability and energy report submitted, councillor, with the application, and it identifies ground source heat pumps as one of the technologies which will be used for the heating in the
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other questions for the officer? No. No. Okay.
No.
Sorry. Councillor Tyson.
Just a quick one, Tom. The burial ground that's adjacent, does that enjoy any particular protection under planning law?
Not that as far as I'm aware. I think if there were works involved within the burial ground, then there may be some consent required from another government department, but not on an adjacent site.
It's not protected as an asset of any sort like that?
Not that I'm aware of. No.
Thank you. Any other questions for the officer? No. Okay. Thank you, Tom. Can we go to the first to the objector, Councillor Ray Blake, please? You've got 5 minutes when you're ready.
Thank you. Good evening, councillors. I'm Ray Blake, Chairman of Ickleford Parish Council. The residents of Ickleford have had to accept that change is in the future, and although they fought hard and long to preserve the beauty that is Ickleford and the green belt with its natural habitats from development, they were forced to accept what we all know now as the local plan. Since that acceptance, the village is now suffering from small pockets of land being extracted from the Greenbelt by North Herts Council and Herts County Council solely for the purpose of private development. Arnold's Farm is just one of those pieces of land which during the local plan consultations was considered to play a big part in the green setting of Ickleford's heritage. With its close proximity to the conservation area, Arnold's Farm listed buildings, the Plume of Feathers Public House, the 12th century Grade 1 listed St Catherine's Church and outlying listed cottages. At the time of the local plan, North Herts Council agreed in writing that this site was not consistent with national policy and therefore would not be considered for development. I'm here to state tonight that nothing has changed. It is still part of Ickleford's heritage. It still brings nature with its flora and fauna to the edge of the conservation area and therefore sets the green scene for the listed buildings that surround it. This green space brings peace, tranquility and more importantly privacy to the setting of the Alleyfield Cemetery, located on the north side of the development and which was given to the village for its peaceful setting, all of which will be compromised by the lack of privacy to the detriment of mourners. Light pollution and lack of natural habitat and wildlife corridors will soon deter any wildlife that inhabits the site and its surrounding areas. The site is situated on Chambers Lane, which is one of the narrowest roads in Ickleford. It was constructed during the Victorian era, hence the location of some of Ickleford's Victorian cottages. There is therefore insufficient room to allow for entry and exit safely, with the entrance being located at the narrowest point. The entrance width would have to be of such a magnitude to allow refuge, HGVs and emergency vehicles to access without inconvenience to other users of Chambers Lane and its residents. Sufficient parking has not been allowed for, especially for visitors, which will undoubtedly lead to parking off-site and within local streets. No guarantee has been put in place that all wastewater and sewage will be directed towards the Bedford Road via a pump with onward transmission towards Hitchin. Without this guarantee, Ickleford's Victorian sewage system would find it almost impossible to accommodate discharges from site. Regardless of reports by Anglian Water that there is sufficient room, it has been confirmed by them that whilst calculating their figures, they do not take into account the deluge of rainwater from the site and property runoff. Many properties within the village located at the north and south suffer flooding and sewage backup after a heavy downpour. This site, for many reasons, should never have been removed from its greenbelt protection, With the Bowman's Mill site and its 70 properties soon to reach planning, Arnold's Farm is not needed. It will bring nothing to the residents of Ickleford, as prices like Burford Grange and the proposed site at Manor Close will be out of reach for future Ickleford purchasers. I therefore ask the Planning Committee to refuse this application and to return this site to the Greenbelt to once again be an important part of Ickleford's heritage and the natural habitat that surrounds the conservation area and the Allerfield Cemetery. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Blake. Are there any points of clarification for Councillor Blake? Councillor Levitt.
Yeah, just coming back on the burial ground. From memory, that's quite a recent one, isn't it? It started quite recently.
2010, I believe it was. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Can we go on to member advocates? Councillor Louise Peace, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you also to Councillor Blake for being here tonight when the Parish Council have a meeting. There are too many harms that outweigh the benefit of these new homes in Ickleford. After carefully considering all the information available both before and after the recommendation was made, there are 3 planning grounds to refuse this application. First, flood risk. As mentioned, a response from the lead local flood authority was received after the officer report was prepared, and it states that on a desktop assessment of the site, the risk of flooding appears low, though there is medium and high risk of flooding on Chambers Lane. The applicant has not provided a flood risk assessment, as we heard, or a drainage strategy with this application, and therefore the LPA may wish to confirm how the site will be drained. That's end of quote. In the absence of this drainage strategy, it is not currently possible to properly evaluate this application. It should not be granted until this information is available to members and they are satisfied that there is no flood risk for the existing residents on Chambers Lane. This issue is fundamental to the application and should be considered now rather than by condition 11. The second reason is biodiversity. The applicant's 2021 ecological survey is out of date. As set out in the officer's report at 312, the applicant will need to evidence how the loss of biodiversity will be offset elsewhere to ensure compliance with policy. This information has not been provided by the applicant and should be available for this committee to consider prior to determination. Further reference is made that suggests that the applicant has agreed in principle to a financial contribution to works off-site at Orton Head Common. The extent of this contribution should be in the public domain and the information made available to this committee before the application is decided. Finally, harm to the Ickleford Conservation Area. This site is bounded on 3 sides by 2 listed buildings and the Alleyfield Burial Ground. The trustees of the burial ground strongly object to this application, and Emerging Neighbourhood Plan Policy CE2, which names Alleyfield as an important open space, has not been considered in the officer's report. On the Chambers Lane side of the development, the officer's report acknowledges that there will be a significant change to the street scene. You will have seen, well, you should have seen a report from the Conservation Officer as a supplement. You've just heard it read out to you. I've been requesting this document since publication of the agenda, as in my opinion, the main reason this application should be refused is the effect on the conservation area and the heritage there. I was amazed by the report that you've just heard read out when it finally arrived, as the Arnold's Farm site was assessed in 2016 as part of a heritage assessment for local plan site allocation. The officer's report references this heritage assessment and makes a comparison to the site at Lodge Court that we decided at a previous planning committee, where permission was granted. The Conservation Officer's report on the 2 sites at the time was very different, and I've got it here. For Lodge Court, it says subject to policies and recommendations contained in this document, it can be developed. However, for Arnold's Farm, which is called Site 329, the development would have unacceptable impacts on adjacent heritage assets, significantly changing the setting of assets, impacting upon listed buildings and the setting of the conservation area. This proposal site is not consistent with national policy, and this makes no reference to Greenbelt. This is just the impact on the heritage. It goes on to say the development of this site could impact upon the immediate setting of the Grade 2 listed Arnold's Farm and the Plume of Feathers Public House. The development of the site could impact upon cottages to the north of Arnold's Farm by removing their present countryside setting. It is difficult to see how Site 329 can be recommended for a housing allocation of any scale without significantly impacting upon the significance of heritage assets, including the Ickleford Conservation Area and 2 Grade 2 listed buildings. And it is unlikely that any mitigation measures would reduce impacts upon the heritage assets significantly to enable a development at this site. I do not understand how the Conservation Officer's report that you've heard read out tonight is referring to the same site. When the heritage assessment was written in 2016, Arnold's Farm was greenbelt. Now it is not. However, this does not change any of the conclusions from the heritage report, which concerns the harm to the surrounding heritage area and not the greenbelt specifically. And for all these reasons and those given by Councillor Blake, this application should be refused.
Thank you, Councillor Peace. Any questions for clarification for Councillor Peace? Councillor Mason.
Thank you. I'm not sure this question is for Councillor Peace or Councillor Blake, actually. I held off the first time. I note that the Ickleford Neighbourhood Plan is up for referendum, I think, on the 14th of March. What does that say about building houses on this plot, or doesn't it? I couldn't find it anywhere, so.
You want me to go first?
Yes.
Okay.
With the neighbourhood plan, basically, the more it develops through to its conclusion, it has more persuasion, so it can be taken into account.
Thank you. I want to put your question to Councillor Peace to begin with, because this is her
Yeah, I mean,
slot.
because obviously that was my question. I'm just minded. I would feel
You can't do it to me. It's got to be to Councillor Peace.
I'm just giving a context to my question. I would be uncomfortable if I voted for something today and then found in a very short period of time that it was very much against that plan, for instance. So I just wondered if anyone knows what it says.
Could you try and answer that, please, Councillor?
So obviously the neighbourhood plan cannot contradict anything in the local plan or national planning policy framework. There is a policy that specifically mentions the Alleyfield burial ground, which is obviously very close to this site, which is policy policy C2 on recreation and green space, which I mentioned in my talk. And that highlights 4 specific areas in the village, one of which is the Alleyfield burial ground. And it says development proposals which would reduce the quality or quantity of the identified facilities will only be supported where the existing facilities are re-provided to an equivalent or improved quality or quantity in an appropriate location. Now, it's probably not appropriate to be moving a burial ground, and the trust who manage the burial ground have strongly objected to this on the basis that it will reduce the quality of the burial ground. So on that grounds, the neighbourhood plan would not support this.
Is questions of clarification there? Please, you look puzzled, Councillor Allen.
From what I've just heard, that's not at all relevant to what the question was. You're saying that they'd need to move the burial ground and you'd be against it if they had to move the burial ground. They don't have to move the burial ground, so why would they be against it because of that reason?
I think that I'll just speak on Councillor Peace's behalf. I'll try to. Councillor Peace did start on C2 of the Ickleford local plan and how the Alleyfield burial ground was mentioned. Councillor Peace, would you like to continue?
Can I just come back, because the key word in the policy is quality. And the feeling from the trust that run the burial ground is that this development would affect the quality of people who come there to enjoy the peace and tranquility. Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions for Councillor Peace? No. We go on to Councillor James Porter, please. It's not Councillor. Sorry, I got stuck in a rut there. To Mr. James Porter.
Good evening, and thank you for letting me speak for a few minutes. Following the changes now included in the local plan, the proposed site does now sit inside the village boundary and outside of the greenbelt. We believe the proposed design creates a high quality, energy efficient and environmentally sustainable development of 2, 3 and 4 bedroom houses. The submitted scheme for these proposals was originally prepared back in 2021, following a pre-consultation process with the planning department. The architect unfortunately ceased trading before submission, so there was a bit of a delay and the scheme was finally submitted by Wassell & Porter in August 22. During the course of the application process, amendments have been undertaken to respond to and address comments and queries raised. This has resulted in the final scheme in question today. Use and safety of the length of Chambers Lane has been raised by various parties. A strong positive to these proposals is the lane is to be widened and in addition, a footpath added along its entire length. This will join the footpath on Chambers Lane below the play area and recreation ground to the footpath in front of Arnold's Farm buildings and beyond. Parking is another point raised as a concern by several parties. The original proposals did include additional visitor parking in the submission, but this was objected to and requested to be reduced by Highways to the numbers now included in the final layout. An additional access onto the footpath to the north of the site was also suggested and considered, but this has not been included as would not follow the guidance of secured by design for new development. Overlooking of Raymond Cottages has also been considered, but plot 8 is some 23 metres away, plot 9, 22 metres away from the front elevation of the cottages. All the plots have good sized gardens and there is a 5 metre separating landscape strip now between the rear of the gardens and the footpaths around the site. Net gain biodiversity wasn't a policy when the original scheme was submitted. Changes have now been incorporated into the scheme, such as an increased retention of existing landscaping, a wide perimeter landscaping strip, the omission of one house, and an increase in landscaping from the original proposal. The applicant has also agreed to the principle of a financial contribution in discussion with the local authority for off-site mitigation work. When the decision was taken during the application to omit 1 unit from the development, to reduce the density and increase the maintained and supplemented landscaping and biodiversity, the frontage plot number 1, adjacent to Arnold's Farm, was considered. However, it was felt that the design and connectivity to the village is improved by its retention. This was also taken into account in consideration to the relationship to the nearby listed buildings. It is acknowledged that the biggest visual change as a result of the scheme is the removal of the hedge to the north of Chambers Lane. Its removal, however, does enable the safer use of the lane by both increased width and visibility. During the pre-application process, it was suggested by the planning department that the houses to the south of the site accessed off Chambers Lane with a strong street presence, which follows the character of the area. This is something that we strongly agree with. I believe that if the scheme is consented, it will create 9 well-designed, modest houses and a positive contribution to the village. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. Can I just ask you to repeat part of it because I didn't follow it? Could you just repeat the figures about the Roman cottages? Raymond Cottages, sorry.
Just to get it right. There is the plot 8 and 9 are the houses which are on that side of the site. There is a garden depth of plot 8 of 23 metres to the frontage of Raymond Cottages, and plot 9 is 22 metres away from the front elevation. There is a 5 metre separating landscape strip from the back of the gardens to the edge of the footpath in front of the cottages.
I couldn't hear that bit. Thank you very much. Questions, clarification from Mr. Porter. Councillor Winstanley.
Hello. I just wondered if we could have a bit more detail about the offsetting of the biodiversity loss, because I went down there today and it's teeming with wildlife. It's basically one big hedgerow. It is very overgrown, but there's a substantial hedgerow on the road. Then beyond that is scrub, but it's full of activity. I just would like to know what the offsetting of that biodiversity loss would look like, please.
Ms. Porter?
Basically, as you can imagine, the site, when it was, as I said, it was first designed back in 21. At the point in 21, it was an open field, and all the scrubland has been developed since then. So we've left it as opposed to the previous site because there's no reason to remove it until anything else is decided. That has meant that biodiversity calculations become a little bit skewed because there's a lot more wildlife on site. The discussion, as I said, when we did originally submit, biodiversity didn't exist, but it's taken quite a long time to get to this point. So we've done what we can with the site, but it is accepted that there will be a shortfall on the net gain. So a contribution has been agreed to provide some financial contribution to offset them.
Thank you. Councillor Winstead.
Sorry, but there's no figure or nothing more than that at this stage.
There is a suggested figure, but it's still for final agreement for the unilateral agreement.
Okay, thank you.
So we haven't got a figure that you've brought to the committee?
There is a figure that's been discussed with the planning department, but it's not until there's a unilateral undertaking for that specific figure and it's agreed. I can't confirm whether that figure will be finalised exactly until it's signed off.
Thank you,
Mayor. We have agreed to a figure that was suggested to us.
Thank you. Back to it in his final statement. Any other questions of Mr. Porter? Councillor Tyson.
Yes, I was going to ask the same question that Councillor Winstanley asked about the offsetting. So my follow-up to that would have been, whatever the contribution turns out to be, what will the actual sort of, how will the offsetting be implemented? Do we know what form that will take, wherever it will be?
That's it. Shall I ask the officer?
Tom knows, okay.
Yes, please, Tom.
Yes, through you, Chair. I've had a discussion with the council's service manager for the green spaces, and he has identified to me several projects at Houghton Head Common which would benefit from biodiversity net gain, and I've asked for some figures on those projects, and I've discussed those projects with the applicant, and we are getting close to, or there's a suggested figure, but we need clarity from the council's service manager as to what the costs are for those individual projects. But what will happen is that we'll receive eventually a unilateral undertaking from the applicant to pay that sum of money to the council, which will then be given to the Green Spaces team to implement at Houghton Head Common.
And are any of these schemes in or close to Ickleford?
It's close to the parish boundary, I believe. I think the Houghton Head Common is close to the parish boundary. Orton Common. These projects are also in the council's green space strategy document. So there is, a link to that document with these particular projects.
Thank you. Any other questions at this point? Councillor Tyson.
Yes, my other question was going to be about the, I've got a note here about maintaining separation between the site, and I've got down here the burial ground, but is it the case that the existing tree and hedge line will be maintained on the three sides of the site that aren't along Chambers Lane.
Could you? Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Can I invite the officer to respond to any other issues raised, please?
Thank you, Chair. I just think it would be helpful just to explain the history behind the removal of the site from the green belt and why it wasn't a housing site. Because I think that's is part of the parish council's concerns, given the heritage assessment that was commissioned by the council when it was being considered as a housing site. That heritage assessment was an external consultant commissioned by the council, and there wasn't a scheme before the council in looking at that site at the time. It was just that in principle, should it be a housing site? And the matter was discussed at the examination in public by the inspector, and on the advice of the heritage officer, it was not proposed for an allocation. However, the inspector agreed to bring the land within the settlement to enable the opportunity for any future smaller Winfield schemes to be considered on their merits. And that's what we've got before us this evening. The scheme has been presented to the council, so we've considered it on its merits. We've consulted English Heritage and the council's conservation officer. No objections have been raised, hence the recommendation that's acceptable in heritage terms.
Thank you. So can we have a proposer, please, Councillor Levitt?
Chair, before I
Yes.
do anything, can I seek some clarification on matters on the, particularly on conditions that have come about from what the speakers have said this evening? Firstly, I think the biodiversity is actually covered by condition 15. That mentions the biodiversity at the end. So I think it's covered by the condition as well as the other things. So I think that's okay. Condition 12, no development approved by this permission shall take place until a phase 2 investigation report is recommended, etc., etc., etc. Phase 2 investigation of what? I'm assuming it should say contamination on that one.
Yes, Chair, that is a condition concerning contamination. We've received a desktop study, which is the phase 1, and that has led to the council's environmental health officer suggesting this condition regarding a phase 2. So it does relate to contamination issues.
Thank you. So I assume that also applies to condition 13, which is the follow-up from that one. Okay. My last one is condition 11, which is relating to surface water drainage. And I'm particularly thinking here about what we heard earlier about the local flood authority, Leeds Flood Authority, and the concerns about runoff. The condition just refers it back to the local planning authority. And there's no requirement in there for a flood risk assessment, which from what was being said earlier, I understand is probably now a good idea. So at the very least, I'd like to see that condition put in. So it goes back to the flood authority. But the main problem with that paragraph is it goes into it and it goes, where a sustainable drainage scheme is to be provided, the submitted details shall, and then there's nothing after it. So there's a lot of the condition missing. So I'm very concerned, Chair, about actually going ahead with this with the flood assessment missing, that information missing. There's quite a bit of stuff missing on the technical side of it, shall we say, which gives me some concerns about actually making a decision on something that's a bit missing out of it.
Chair, if I could just explain, I did say in my updating that condition 11 needed to be added to, and there was purely a error on my part. There are 3 elements to that condition which need to be added, and I can read them out if that's helpful. So where the condition says where a sustainable drainage scheme is to be provided, the submitted details shall, then the following 3 bullet points need to be added. Provide information about the design, storm period, intensity, the method employed to delay and control the surface water discharge from the site, and the measures taken to prevent pollution of the receiving groundwater and/or surface waters. Secondly, to include a timetable for its implementation. And thirdly, to provide a management and maintenance plan for the lifetime of the development, which shall include the arrangements for adoption by any public authority or statutory undertaker and any other arrangements to secure the operation of the scheme throughout its lifetime. So those words should be added to the condition. I'd just like to mention that that condition was imposed by the appeal inspector on the Turnpike Lane scheme. Members will recall there was a planning application last month's meeting where the history was the 5-unit scheme on that site was allowed on appeal. Well, this was the condition that was imposed by that inspector. So given that that site is a similar size to this site, I felt it was appropriate to impose that particular condition. But we can expand it to include in consultation with the lead local flood authority, if that's helpful.
What do you think about that, Councillor Everett?
Yeah, I think that covers it. I would have liked to have seen it up front. I'm a little bit. Yeah, I'm happy with the inclusions. What's proposed? I'm happy with the inclusions. What's proposed? Therefore, I've moved the recommendation to approve, Chair. In that case.
Thank you. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Bloxham?
I'm happy to second and reserve my right.
Thank you. Can we go to debate? Councillor Allen?
4.3.61 states the development will result in, can't believe where I've got my line there. Significant length of hedgerow along Chambers Lane without an equivalent replacement. This will detract from the existing country lane feel and green margin character of Chambers Lane. Consequently, there will be moderate harm to the character and appearance of the area. We have very few traditional lanes left. I don't want to see this happening. I feel this is a proper and right reason to go against, so therefore I won't be voting in favour of this.
Sir Mason?
Am I on? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I have a number of concerns with this. One is, I think I sometimes worry that when we say, so here's the green belt and you can't build in here now, but we're going to move the line and the line's going to be here. So the green belt now is, the line is here. And as I understand that, it doesn't mean you have to build in everything inside that line. And just because we've changed the boundaries around it before does not mean that if you have a green handkerchief and drop it on the ground, you have to build a house on it. And that's sometimes how it feels. It's any possible area within that newly defined area has to be built on. And my understanding that's not the case. I also noticed that in the local plan, it didn't identify. Quite often when we're here, we're dealing with areas which have been identified for housing under the local plan. My understanding is this wasn't identified, even though it's not in the green belt, and it wasn't identified for housing. And I suppose I'm sat here thinking, so I understand that they can build here, but I'm not sure that just because we can means we should. And the other thing I'm worried on from the debate that we've had is about the biodiversity thing. And I kind of understand if you build housing on a football pitch, as happened near me, it's acceptable to say, well, okay, but we'll make a condition you have to build a football pitch somewhere else down the road. But I'm not sure if you build on an area of natural diversity, it necessarily works the same way. I mean, I don't know if anyone going to tell the flora and fauna that it's okay because we're going to build here, but you can go down to Alton Head Common. It just seems, I'm not sure. I'm just not comfortable with this. And as I say, I fully accept from what the officers have said that it is possible to build here. I'm just not sure that we should.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. Other thoughts? Sorry, Kerry?
Do we want to check in with the planning officer?
Right, it's just, we're checking the planning officer about what Councillor Mason just said.
Chair, yes, it's acknowledged that this isn't a housing site in the local plan, but within the local plan, there is an allocation for windfall sites, and that's an important element of the council's housing provision in the plan period. So it's sites like this that will count towards the council's housing land supply in the long term.
Thank you. Yes, John?
Chair, yes, I'd also like to remind members that the tilted balance applies to this application, and that basically indicates that we should consider that the harm would have to significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits of delivering housing on this site, because currently, in terms of applications that were submitted before December last year, we apply the tilted balance based upon a current estimate of 3.5 years supply.
If you want a moment.
Because of when the application was first submitted.
Yes, the application was submitted before December, and it's an idiosyncrasy of the MPPF. If I can explain a little bit further to help you. The MPPF has indicated that for councils such as North Hertfordshire, who have adopted a local plan within the last 5 years, we will not need to demonstrate a 5-year supply for the first 5 years of the local plan, which will be up till November 2027. However, that does not apply to any applications that were submitted before December. And therefore, that exemption from having to demonstrate a 5-year supply does not apply to this application and all the other applications that were submitted before the new update to the MPPF. We've done some calculations to ascertain where we are at this particular point in time in terms of the 5-year supply, and our estimate is 3.5 years. Any applications submitted after December, we don't have to do that. We don't have to say what our 5-year supply is. It doesn't apply. We're exempt from having to demonstrate a 5-year supply. So with regards to this application and all other applications submitted before December, that is still currently on our books for consideration. Unless there are reasons for not applying the 5 years, the tilted balance, such as harm to heritage assets, sites in the green belt, we wouldn't need necessarily to apply this tilted balance. It does apply to this, in our view, the tilted balance applies to this proposal. And therefore, that means that for us to refuse planning permission, we should consider, we should apply the tilted balance whereby the harms to the development would have to significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits of delivering these houses, which would contribute towards the housing land supply. Hopefully, if there are any further questions, hopefully that's explained why, in this particular case, the tilted balance applies. Whereas for new applications received since December, we don't have to go there in terms of demonstrating the 5-year supply. Thank you.
Thank you. If you want to remind yourself of the elements of the tilted balance, it's on page 65 and page 66 of your documents. Councillor Levitt.
Thank you, Chair. I came into this meeting in two minds on this one, as I did the previous application, but somewhat ironically, the arguments that we used to refuse the last one are being used to approve this particular one. And with those conditions amended and clarified as we discussed, I can't find any sound planning reasons to refuse this application. Hence the reason I propose that we accept, Chair.
Reiterating your proposal.
Yeah.
Councillor Tyson.
Yeah, I have to agree. And as much as I would like to have this refused, because I don't feel instinctively any sympathy for windfall sites at all, anywhere basically, but I was hopeful that the local plan would mean that windfall sites were not a common occurrence at these meetings anymore. And the tilted balance, I thought we'd managed to put that all behind us quite successfully, and here it comes back again, rearing its ugly head. And those are the facts. It's not in the green belt. We can't change that. It's inside the settlement boundary now. We can't change that. And I can't think of planning reasons that would be sustainable in getting this thing refused, as much as I feel that uncomfortable with the site being built on. I've been there, had a good look round, and it's on the edge of the village, albeit there is an area of sort of suburbanized development in Boswell Drive nearby. We're told that the two heritage assets wouldn't significantly be affected by the development. Yeah, so I think I'm going to have to say that I'll vote in favour of this, but reluctantly.
Thank you. Any other comments? So before we go to the vote, let's get it clear. So we've got the condition 15, which is about the biodiversity net gain, and we're happy that is in hand. Condition 12 and 30 about contamination. Condition 11, we've got the 3 bullet points to add. Sorry? Yes, we've got that. Yes, we've got that. Given that, shall we go to the vote? Caroline?
Carried, Chair.
Thank you, Caroline. Item 9, 23 stroke 20802 stroke LBC. Oh, sorry. I'll hold it there for a minute.
Councillor Denby.
That working?
Right. So I'm about to say 2628 High Street, Gravely. Thank you. 2628 High Street, Gravely. Tom Ray to present, please.
There are no updates, Chair, so if I could go straight to the slides. Thank you, Chair. This is the location site for this development, numbers 24 to 28 High Street in Gravely. The site is on the right-hand side, the right-hand side of the High Street heading north, and part of a group of listed buildings there, all shaded purple, you see there on the screen. Next slide, please. So this is the photograph of the front of the building, originally a terrace of 3, now into 2 dwellings, 2 stories with extensions at the rear. Next slide, please. And these are photographs of those extensions, a 2-story extension and a single-story rear extension with a flat roof, which is the subject of this particular listed building application. Next slide, please. This is the internal photograph of the living room, but the main feature affected is that wall in the background. There will be a new doorway inserted into that wall to provide access to the existing bathroom. Next slide, please. And this slide is within the same room, but it shows on the right-hand side there a boarded door. The conservation officer has recommended in his condition that the new doorway in the previous slide matches the design and appearance of that particular doorway to respect the historic character of the building. Next slide, please. And this is again the location plan of the application site within the built-up part of the High Street. Next slide, please. These are the floor plans of the proposed development. On the right-hand side there, you will see that the internal stud wall is to be moved to create a larger kitchen area, and the new doorway inserted into that bathroom, and also the external window is proposed to be replaced with a timber framed window. Next slide, please. And this is an image of the boarded door that I mentioned with the existing opening into the kitchen on the left-hand side. Next slide, please. Externally, these are the images of the existing and proposed window, the existing on the left-hand side and the proposed design of the new casement window on the right-hand side. Next slide, please. That's the end of the presentation, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions for the planning officer? No. Can we have a proposer, please? Councillor Tyson.
Yes, I'm propose that we accept the recommendation to grant this building consent.
And a seconder, please. Councillor Allen.
Happy to second.
Thank you. Debate. Councillor Allen, you're
I'm still on. I'm not wanting to debate.
you're right. Don't want to debate.
Explain why.
No. Okay, shall we go to the vote?
Vote is carried, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Item 10, planning appeals.
Thank you, Chair.
We just have one item. There's no appeals lodged, and there's one appeal that has been dismissed, which is for a single-storey detached double carport at Harvest Farm in Purton Road, Holwell. And the inspector accepted our decision that refused planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you. That report is for noting. So I'm going to close this meeting at 9:30, and the next PCC meeting is on the 21st of March. I look forward to seeing you then. Good night.